Hello everybody, welcome back. So in our last lecture we were really exploring and understanding sex-linked inheritance. And now we're going to start to cover a couple other important types of genetic variation that can occur. And the first one that we're going to be discussing today is this concept of incomplete dominance. And essentially that's understanding two genes that can have a intermediary type of effect. So an example that we tend to use is understanding versions of a gene that specify hair texture. So there are really only three very general phenotypes. There's curly hair, straight hair, and wavy hair. And those actually have to do with how many sulfur bonds are actually in your hair. So if you've ever wondered why curly girls don't use sulfate-based shampoos, it's because it'll affect those thiol bonds and create less curl definition. So a practical method for understanding curly hair and the genetics and chemistry of curly hair. But when we're talking about this idea of incomplete dominance, we really have to understand this form of inheritance in which both heterozygotes have a phenotype that is the intermediate between a homozygous dominant trait and a homozygous recessive trait. So let's take a look at just what a sort of Punnett square would look like, where we have an individual who's a straight-haired mother, which is this homozygous recessive, little h, compared with the genetics of somebody who is dominant with this uppercase HH, which is basically saying that we have a dominant gene resulting in curly hair. And when we go through meiosis, we have an intermingling of these genes, and every single one of the offspring is going to inherit one large H and one middle H. But instead of the homozygous dominant overpowering that homozygous recessive, we actually get this intermediate effect where we have neither curly hair nor straight hair, and we get this intermediate of wavy hair. Now, there are certainly always going to be more complexities when we're starting to talk about genetics, and it's rarely do we have like these very perfect systems in which there is only one gene that is coding for curly hair, one gene that is coding for straight hair. But the important thing to remember here is that this incomplete dominance is essentially creating an intermediate phenotype between those two extremes. So while there might be more complexity in the genetics or multiple genes that are controlling for hair texture, it's a good way to start to understand this idea of incomplete dominance. Another important way we can start to think about this idea of complex inheritance is this idea of codominance. And so the easiest and most representative sample that we use to sort of understand this idea of codominance is understanding blood type. So we know that transfused blood must be compatible in ways that are then determined by our genetic code. So in this case, in the idea of codominance, both maternal and paternal alleles contribute equally as well as separately to the phenotype. So what does that mean? So for blood type, there are three group alleles. There is A, B, and O. And because of that, there are these genotypes. So this is the types of combinations that you can have from these original three alleles, where you have OO, AO, BO, AB, AA, and BB. So these are the genotypes that are possible. However, when we start to look at phenotype, and this idea of codominant inheritance, the heterozygous individuals display the effects of both alleles in their phenotype. So how does that play out in terms of the actual biology of a blood cell? So essentially we have these markers that exist on the outside of these cells, and that is what ultimately sort of determines the traits. So for example, if you have the genotype AA or AO, you're able to donate to type A or to type AB recipient, and then you can receive blood from A or O donor. And that's because of what is expressed on these blood markers. So you see in type O, there are actually no group blood markers. And AB actually has both, again, this idea of codominance. We have both the A markers and the B markers. So AB is what's called the universal recipient and is able to receive blood from any type of these blood donors. Where, for example, type A or type B can only receive from type A or type B, or the universal donor type O, because it does not have those those markers on the outside of the cell. So in this case, we say that blood type alleles A and B are codominant, where O is recessive to both A and B. So you can see here, if you have an AO, you exhibit A, so you see that it's recessive, whereas A and B are codominant, and you are expressing both types of markers on the outside of these blood cells. So let's explore another type of complex genetic inheritance pattern that we can see. We're going to start by looking at this idea of a polygenic trait. So essentially, a polygenic trait is a single trait that is determined by the interaction between the alleles of more than one gene. So an example of this is human height. So rather than having one distinct phenotype, we actually see this continuous variation of height among individuals. And because we get this range of phenotype rather than this discrete categories, we call this the idea of a polygenic trait, poly meaning many. Additionally, we can have this idea of a multifactorial trait, where we're getting interactions between genes and the environment, which contributes to a phenotype. And think back to like this idea of epigenetics that we started exploring at the top of this lecture. And again, we have this idea of human height, where we have both a polygenic trait, where we have multiple genes working together to determine whether how tall a specific individual is, but it's also a multifactorial trait, because we know that human height is dramatically can depend on the nutrition that one receives. So we know that with human height, we're getting complex interactions of discrete genetic material and genetic makeup, as well as this idea of nutrition and environment working together to produce this complex interaction to create the phenotype of human height. Okay, so we're going to stop there with this lecture. We're going to start and pick up where we're going to start to look at other forms of complex inheritance, and specifically the interaction between genes and behavior. Okay, see you soon.